Hi, everyone. And even though I can't see all of your shining faces right now, I just want to say thank you so much for showing up. No matter why or what you're here for today, I want to say that I know your time is precious. I'm really honored to be here and know that even though this is supposed to be something where I am getting to share my experiences with you, maybe for some benefit, that really this is an opportunity for me to really live my best life and show up for the person and the leader that I want to be. So I'm so excited about today. So I'm going to show you a few pictures and a few quotes and things like that as we go through. And they're just for you to kind of understand who I am and what I'm talking about. But in, I feel like a social media world, it's easier to kind of benchmark things with pictures. So that's what we're going to do today. And then hopefully we'll have some great questions at the end. And then if you think of anything else, you are super welcome to reach out to me afterwards. So with that, let's get started. So I am here in Fayetteville, Arkansas, which is the home of the Razorbacks. I am a University of Arkansas alumni nearly 3 times now. I'm in the final stages of writing my PhD. And I was just joking with Jen and Andrea before this started that I have Razorbacks or hogs all over my house. And so I'm a proud Razorback alumni. I got into the SUNY Poly community because I work for Wolfspeed, and obviously our new fab in Marcy, New York is going to be closely related to the SUNY Poly campus. And of course, we've got new scholarships there, and so we're really excited to see this growing community. I see from the poll that we actually don't have any engineers with us today, but that's okay. I hope that what I have to say will be helpful to you no matter what your background is. So as you heard, my background is in electrical engineering, though I would say I'm more on the business side of engineering now. And despite my research for my PhD, I don't do much research day to day anymore. So I'm really excited to share with you kind of my journey and how education shaped that journey, and then some of the things that I have the opportunity to do now to kind of change the face of engineering that I'm really passionate about. And, we're going to talk about things like gender diversity today. We're going to talk about changing gender metrics and diversity in engineering. But really, even though this is a conversation that I specifically have within the field of engineering, it's a conversation that's applicable to everyone, no matter what gender you identify with. If you're female, if you're male, diversity supports everyone. And there's so many fantastic research studies out there about that. So I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk about it. So, all right, what is this picture on screen? We're going to talk a little bit about how I decided to become an engineer and then how I decided to make my educational journey and choices from there on. So what you're seeing here is actually from Carlisle, Arkansas, which is the middle of nowhere. Arkansas in southern part. And this is one of my family's farms. And so people ask me where I grew up, and I have the luxury of getting to interface with people all around the world. And so they don't know where Carlisle, Arkansas is, as I imagine that you don't either. And so I say that I grew up in the shadow of a rice farm because I grew up in this tiny town. And I have distinct memories of like my dad doing things in the rice field and me like sitting on a levee with a cream soda and honeysuckle and being like the happiest person in the world. So this is where I grew up, and this is really where my roots started, is in the shadow of a rice farm. If you know anything about farmers, you know that they work hard. And so one of the things that I knew from a fairly young age, and after having turned levee gates in our rice farm, I had decided that farming as a business was not something that I wanted to do. My mother was a retired nurse turned teacher. So she's a science and math teacher. And it was really awesome to grow up as the daughter of a hands-on science teacher, because she made from a very young age science and math feel super approachable. And, you go into math classes as you start getting into your middle school and your high school age. And some people get really scared when they start seeing like X's and equations and things like that. And by the time I reached that point, she had taken that risk out of higher education for me, or bigger education for me. And my dad was an executive at Monsanto, and then retired to become a rice farmer, and then moved on to do other exciting entrepreneurial things. But between the two of them, they really taught me that I could dream as big as I wanted to. And more importantly, that I could do anything that I wanted to, with the caveat that I had to really apply myself, and hard work was the most important. I think sometimes, especially the millennial generation, we get blamed for having, this dream big mentality, and we think everything's going to be handed to us, et cetera, et cetera. But that was really not the case. Is like they instilled in me is that you could dream big, but at the end of the day, it all came down to how hard you were willing to work. When I was in middle school, they at my school at the time, you had to play an orchestra instrument. So I picked violin, and I was terrible at it. And my parents would not let me quit, even though they, I think, probably had to suffer more than I did in that experience of having to listen to someone learn a violin. It's not a great thing. But that, was one really simple way that would shape the way that I came to approach adversity, and this idea of really doing hard work, even if it doesn't feel great, and even if you don't want to sometimes, is really where I started from. And that started from a very early age. And I'm so grateful for that upbringing that I had there. So I also came up with a strong sense of service. So what I learned from my mother is that like you just need to show up and love people. And so it's weird to say that as an engineer, but that's one thing that I try to cultivate every day. And we'll talk about a little bit more throughout this talk, is like, how do you show up and love people, even in a professional sense? And how do you be a servant or be in service as an engineer and things like that? So when I went through high school, all I knew is that I wanted to make a difference. And I had really no idea what that meant. I just knew that I wanted to be connected to make a difference. And I think you hear that a lot, especially with women, especially with female engineers. They'll tell you, I got into this because I wanted to make a difference. And I didn't know an engineer. I couldn't tell you what an engineer did. One of my dad's friends, I was going through the college admission process, and I thought I wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer because I knew I wanted to make a difference. And that's what I thought of when I thought of making a difference, were those kind of discrete positions. And he said to me, if you get an engineering degree, you can be anything that you want. You can go be your doctor or your lawyer, and that would be fine. So I decided that I would do that without knowing anything about it. And so that's how I came to be an engineer. All right. So next, we're going to talk about college. Went to the University of Arkansas, mostly because of the fact that I got a full ride, but two, I was a pole vaulter in high school, and I was a walk-on at the University of Arkansas. And if you don't know anything about the University of Arkansas, the only thing that you really need to know is they are the track capital of the world, the biggest national championships. It's a wonderful track program. I was not that good of a pole vaulter, but for some reason, my coach decided to let me on. And I still make the joke that I was really more of a GPA booster than a fantastic pole vaulter. But it was one of the best experiences that I've had. And again, it taught me that through hard work and through invested time, you really could learn such great things. Even if maybe you weren't the best pole vaulter, you weren't, jumping or winning SECs or NCAAs, which my teammates did do. But it was just such a wonderful experience. All the while I was getting an electrical engineering degree. And the way that I decided to be an electrical engineer was, you have this freshman engineering program, and they introduce you to all of the different engineering disciplines. And one day there was this professor who came in. And he was a neurosurgeon, he was an electrical engineer, he was a researcher, and he did work in Alzheimer's research. And he was growing this neural probe that would eventually, maybe help support Alzheimer's patients and improving Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And 16-year-old me walked up to him as a freshman engineer after his presentation. And I said, "Hi, Dr. Verdin, my name's Lauren Kegley, and I want to work with you." And I, again, don't know what Dr. Verdin saw in me at that point, this plucky 16-year-old who showed up. But he said, "Yeah, absolutely. Come to my office next week. We'll talk." And from there began, 4 years of working with him in undergraduate. And he told me in that first meeting, if you want to do the work that I'm doing, you need to be an electrical engineer. And I said, "Great, sign me up. I'm an electrical engineer now." And again, I didn't really know what that meant or why I wanted to be an electrical engineer. But it turned out to be a fantastic thing. And I learned so much that I wouldn't maybe have had a connection to otherwise. And so through electrical engineering and being an athlete, I learned a lot of persistence. So that took some balancing act. And what I like to say is, if I could manage my career in college, I could manage my career anywhere, or I could manage my time anywhere, because I worked out. I was at the track for 4 to 5 hours a day and then trying to get an engineering degree. So I learned a lot about time management. When I was in the bottom corner here, you see a picture of me at Agra in India. The summer after my junior year, I blacked out, I guess, and signed up to go to India for the first time. I'd never been out of the country. There was 2 engineering study abroad programs. One was in Australia for the semester, and I knew I couldn't really do that with track. And the other was a summer in India. And I was like, sounds like I'm going to India. And it was honestly one of the best experiences that I had. And so I highly recommend, if you are an undergrad or you have the opportunity in your degree program to study abroad or go abroad or travel abroad, again, assuming that we can all do that again soon safely, to do it. I had never left the country, and I just did it. And I found such beauty and such peace in India. And it's still one of my favorite places in the world. A lot of people will tell you that it's a little bit of a crazy place to go, but I think it depends on your personality. For me, it was absolute beauty all around me, the people, the culture. I immediately fell in love with it. So actually, that was after my sophomore year. I think I said after my junior. After my junior year, I took a very different path. I was trying to decide if I wanted to go to med school at that time. And I figured, well, I should probably get an engineering internship. That way I'm like, for sure that I don't want to be an engineer. And then I'll go to med school, and, this internship will look great and all the things. And I started at this small company called Arkansas Power Electronics International. And I started there because I knew interns from previous classes, and they had a fantastic internship program in that they paid you $20 an hour. They gave you an iPad, and they had like unlimited snacks and this wonderful like break room and kind of Google-ish culture at the time when that was getting started. And so and they only took, the top 10%. It was like a very prestigious internship to get in our program. And I was like, that's it, I'm doing it. I'm gonna get that one. And, it's interesting, having started there, really thinking that engineering was not for me. 10 years later, I'm still working for the same company in the same site. Obviously, we have a different name now, and I'll talk about that. But that's how I got started in engineering. As I even as an engineering student, I didn't know what engineers did. And so it was really interesting for me to see the difference between what I was learning in class, which was like crazy complicated equations of this and that, and going, how in the world am I ever going to use this, to actually going into the internship and then really realizing that all I had been learning was kind of a language, but more than just the language. It was the problem solving style and technique. And that's something that you learn regardless of whether you're getting an engineering degree or a business degree or really anything else. It's that idea of how do you process and how do you problem solve. So that's the biggest thing I would say, no matter what degree that you're getting, think about it as a problem solving method, because every day in every way we're problem solving continuously. So that was college for me. I graduated, started at APEI as a full-time engineer. My early career was in R&D. So I worked in high-tech research, government programs. I had great experience both writing government proposals and learning how to manage government programs, which is a very dedicated and specific career, but it taught me a lot about program management and the importance of technical communication. So the one thing that I think is really important and shareable from this R&D experience is that you really had to, in R&D, it's very easy to do things for the sake of doing them. Why am I researching the latest, gravitational wave? Or why am I researching the latest LTCC high temperature technology, which is what I worked on? You can kind of get lost in the why you're doing it and get really caught up in the what you're doing. And so ultimately what I learned from the R&D side was that I needed a broader connection to the why I was doing what I was doing. And R&D was wonderful. And it was really cool to do and to say, like, there's not a book about this, like I'm doing, work that's never been done before. That was really exciting. But what I learned from it most was that being in a lab and doing research day to day was really not for me. And so we were a very small company at the time, about 50 employees, and we had a director of business development. And I don't remember exactly how I either raised my hand and said, I want to do this. I don't remember if I spoke to my boss or some combination of the two. But I said, I really think that's where I need to be. I think I need to be doing more customer things. I know that's not going to start immediately, but I feel like this idea of teaching people about products and about our technology, it's where I want to go. It's my favorite part of the R&D is like the presentation of what we learned and things like that. So I feel like I can apply that really well if I start working in kind of our business development program. So Ty, who is my boss, and you can see him in the picture here, this is us sitting at one of our top booths in the top right corner, one of our early booths. And it's so funny to look back. And as I was going through these pictures, it was so much fun for me to see where we came from, because now we're in these big, massive booths as Wolfspeed. There was a point in my career here where I was starting and kind of almost doing kind of event planning and marketing and social media and things like that, which was weird for me because I had just, spent all this time in R&D and I had gotten my electrical engineering degree. I was in the process of getting my master's, but that's what the company needed at the time. We were, of course, a very small business, and we were trying to grow our brand and reframe who we were. We were in the midst of changing really from a hardcore R&D company into a budding manufacturing facility. And so I stepped outside of my comfort zone and did something that was completely outside of what I expected to be doing with the marketing and social media and things like that, because that's what we needed at the time. And I remember, buying stuff at IKEA and assembling it on the event room floor because, we were a small business. We had to cut costs, things like that. And so it, again, was this idea of problem solving. It's like, okay, we have this problem. Here's how we're going to tackle it. And even though this is not something I know anything about, this is how we're going to get started. So you can see a few pictures of this time in my life here. And then I started at this time after we did the branding, we did a rebranding of the company. I also started owning customers and getting more in touch with customer engagement. And I found that I really loved that. Interestingly enough, at this time, so you'll see that there's one picture on this slide, which is a little different than the others. So at this time, I also got my yoga teacher training certification. And after I got out of college, I took a year and I didn't do much in terms of like physical or mental health, and then slowly threw myself into yoga. And when I say threw myself, I went from like, oh yeah, I'm going to a few yoga classes to like many, many hundreds of hours of training within, 6 months or something. That's just me. Run fast and jump high is something that we used to say in pole vaulting, and I've really never left that. So I went from casual yoga attendee to yoga teacher during this time frame. And honestly, that was one of the most transformative experiences in how I frame my day to day, because I am an engineer, I am a businesswoman, but at the end of the day, I practice yoga every day, through doing this, through sharing with you, through having this conversation, just through making sure that I'm taking intentional breaths, but most of all, making sure that I'm an intentional choice. And I think that's one thing that everybody has the opportunity to do, is to make sure you're making choices that align with your goals, no matter what those goals may be, big or small. In every moment, we're in a choice. And so sometimes not making a choice is also a choice. So learning to recognize choice in our life was a big learning for me that came from my yoga practice. All right, so APEI was acquired by Wolfspeed, which you may know Wolfspeed Cree from the SUNY Poly connection that I mentioned at the beginning. We were acquired in 2015, and we all of a sudden went from a company that was less than 50 people in Fayetteville, Arkansas, to a company that was over 6,000 employees all the way around the world. And we went from this tiny fledgling kind of research corporation that was moving into manufacturing to part of a massive manufacturing organization. And that was really exciting. And it came with a lot of interesting things. And so since 2015, which I cannot believe was 6 years ago, gosh, how the time flies. Since 2015, I've gotten to do a lot of exciting things, which include, still some of that customer engagement, still some of the learning and the teaching that I loved in both yoga as well as in technology. And I've really gotten to expand that into different ways. So right now, what I do at Wolfspeed is I own a product line. And so you can see in the top left-hand side here, this is my newest kind of marketing pitch, is engineered for industry, engineered for implementation, engineered for you, which is the new campaign around my new product line. But my favorite part of my job is that I get to engage with people, and I get to teach them, and I get to hear from them about the technology. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about technology for me, is that it brings the world together. And that's not something that's exclusive to tech. You don't have to work in semiconductors to have this globalization mindset and to experience that in your career. In fact, I would say probably any career that you go into these days will be impacted heavily by that, regardless of if you're sitting at home in your home office or you're jet setting around the world, speaking with customers, etc. So this is the most exciting part of my job. And so I talked to you about my undergraduate career. Let me tell you a little bit about my graduate career while I'm here on the Wolfspeed slide, because I have spent my entire graduate career working full time and being what I call a part-time grad student, and not a very good one. I always knew that like being out in industry was important to me. And so I knew that I at least wanted to get a master's. But I really honestly never imagined getting my PhD. And I can't say that I have it yet, but I'm getting hopefully very close. So my master's degree, like I said, I had kind of always imagined myself getting a master's degree. That was kind of always part of my plan. So when I graduated from school and then I learned that APEI at the time would support my master's, I jumped on it almost instantaneously. And I would say if you're going from an undergraduate place and you have the opportunity to get your master's, take advantage of it, especially while you're kind of already in the mindset of doing schoolwork. It makes it that much easier to do because your life doesn't change that much. Having now been doing this for 10 years, I can say that the transition from a master's to a PhD was a much more significant transition than I expected it to be. Maybe I was naive about this, but I was like, oh, my master's is not that hard. Surely my PhD will not be that hard either. And that sounds crazy, just as I said it. But I was at an international trade show with our broad CRE team, and I was like closing in on my master's, and I was having a conversation with the team, and I was very lucky to get to be around a lot of very impactful and wonderful people at CRE. And our CTO, John Palmer, we were kind of talking about after the trade show one day, like, do I get an MBA? What do I do next? Do I get a PhD? All these things. And he was like, what do you have to lose by getting a PhD? And I was like, yeah, okay, I guess that's a good way to think about it. What do I have to lose? So ultimately, that's how I approached my PhD. And it's taken a lot of effort to get through and really digging down into why I want to do this and why it's important to me to finish or to get close to finishing, because man, you got to write a long paper at the end of it. So that's where I'm at right now. So I think it's important that I share with you why it was important for me to do my PhD, because I've shown you a lot of great pictures and pretty things and highlights and moments in my career, which were fantastic and that I'm so proud of. But the one thing I haven't shared with you yet is that, you know, this is the curated social media view of my career so far. There have been times which were not bright, shiny, and picture worthy. There was a time about 5 years ago in my career where I was, you know, I was very young when I started. I was 18 years old when I started working full time at my internship, and then moved into my full-time career later that year with APEI. And I was open and honest and so genuine about like really wanting to make an impact and make a difference, and being ambitious and all these things. And I'll tell you, not everybody was ready for that. So that was an interesting experience for me. And I had a lot of people telling me what I wasn't. I wasn't technical enough. I wasn't, you know, nice enough. I was too ambitious. I was too assertive. I was too young. Who was I to dream the dreams that I had? And honestly, I had never, when I graduated, I would never have imagined, like you hear that story, right? You hear the story of like the glass ceiling and things like that. And somehow I never thought that that would apply to me or anything else. I thought that was just like, it happens to people, but it's not going to happen to me. And so when it started to happen to me and I started to move into spaces and see feedback from people who perceived me differently because of my long blonde hair or the fact that I showed up in a dress and high heels or whatever it may be, it was really hard for me to internalize, and it was really hard for me to deal with initially. And I would say I've really only really embraced how to do that well in the past, 2 years. And I imagine the entire scope of my career will really be focusing on empowering others and getting better at this myself. But my whole goal is to empower and create spaces which make this easier, that much easier for the people who come after me, regardless of their gender identity or their degree or whatever their background may be. So, one of the big things I think that's important to understand here is that people are going to tell you a lot of what you aren't. You aren't this, you aren't that. And it's your opportunity, and you will always have the opportunity to cultivate what you are and to focus on what you are and to think about who you want to be. And everybody has feedback. And the biggest thing that I've learned in the last couple of years is that not all feedback is good feedback. Take what you need from feedback and what grows and will help support you, and then leave the rest. Of course, you need to be really highly cognizant of what patterns come up in feedback, because there is often things that you need to maybe address to be a better you and to be a better leader and whatever you want to be. but it's your opportunity again to shift from accepting everything to understanding what you need to accept and how it will support your growth goals. And that's a really easy thing for me to say, but I want you to know that it's something I'm working on every single day. So easy to say, hard to implement for sure. So one of the most exciting things that I've gotten to do, and the thing that I love about technology in general, is the ability to bring the world together. And so with Wolfspeed, I've had the great luxury to travel all over the world and speak with customers in all sorts of crazy industries about what I do. And that's my favorite part, is that interaction and that mutual learning that we have from each other. And my hope for you is that you have the opportunity to do that, no matter what you're passionate about, that you find people that you can learn from and stay curious with, because I think that is the heart of what we do. And last week, I actually had the opportunity to interview Zelon Lee with IEEE. And you'll be able to find, we'll send you the link afterwards if you want to see it, but she is this powerhouse in semiconductors and diversity advocate, and she's just wonderful. And she said, when you're not learning, or when you stop learning, you stop living. And I was like, yes, that's wonderful. That is exactly how I feel, because I think it's so important to stay curious, not only about what you're doing, but just about life in general. This is a really random thing, but I consume podcasts like air and like water, and all sorts of types of podcasts. But I love that because it gives me the opportunity to learn different stories and learn different perspectives and learn about a broad range of different topics. So stay tuned for that. It will also be a podcast, but figure out what feeds you, what feeds your curiosity. Is it books? You know, in today's day, it could even be YouTube. Is it podcasts? Like, what feeds your curiosity? And like, always stay in touch with that. So don't lose that curiosity, especially if you're an undergrad or you're a grad, and you're excited about, getting out of student mode maybe. Remember that you're going to always be a student of life. So hopefully every day you will learn something new, and you will have that rare opportunity to focus on learning something new every day. And that shift, I think, really helps shift your perspective about what's important and how you move around in the world. So there's this beautiful quote, and it's from Maya Angelou. And I won't read you this whole quote. It's from her poem, Our Grandmothers. But the most important thing that struck me like a ton of bricks, and something that I think is so critical for everyone, male, female, wherever you're at in your educational or learning experience in this life, that I think you can remember. So she says, I go forth along and I stand as 10,000. So what I think about in those moments where I am not feeling like my best self, I am not feeling like the person that I want to be, or that I can't, or I'm not enough, or anything like that, I remember this quote: I go forth along and I stand as 10,000. And sometimes you need to bring that energy of the 10,000, people that you represent into something to give you a boost of confidence and to give you a boost of overall support. So remember that if you're ever feeling like you're stuck or something like that, you're part of a community that supports you, whether it's your immediate family, your friends, whatever that may be. There's always going to be people who support you, and you are part of a legacy. I was actually listening to a podcast last night, and she said, you are somebody's ancestor. So start living like, you're going to make them proud. And I thought that was a really interesting way to think about it. So never forget that your legacy lives on in ways that you can't imagine. So make sure that you're, again, bringing forward that intentional choice in everything you do, so that you can choose to be the person that you want to be and show up that way every day. So this is also really special to me, this second half, which I won't read, but I hope you've had the opportunity to read here. This second half is really important to me because in the last 3 years, I had a rare and unique and very difficult opportunity to walk through the last days of life with my grandmother. She came to live with my mother, and I will be forever grateful to Wolfspeed for letting me have the flexibility that I needed to help take care of her and to have this opportunity. So in the top right corner, you can see a picture of my entire family, including my partner, Stephen, with our matriarch, Grinny Goose, in the middle there. And then you can see some pictures from her along her journey at the end. On the left-hand side, this was us at Christmas, and then in the middle, right before she passed. And I think especially in the time of COVID, this is really important to talk about, especially when we're talking about career, because it is so easy, if you are anything like me, to get lost in the to-do list. And I don't think I've ever completed anything on my to-do list. There's always more to be done. But don't get caught up in what's left to be done and forget to live your life along the way. That's the biggest thing that both my experience with my grandmother as well as COVID in general has taught me. And again, it's that idea of intentional choice. You only have so many hours in the day. How are you choosing to use those? And is this the life that you're wanting to create? And know that there will be times where you're probably not living an intentional choice, where you're probably not showing up and making the decisions that you're really passionate about. And that's okay. There's no problem in that. You can always come back. So I have so many other things that I could tell you and that I could say, but I definitely want to leave some space for questions. And I would love to hear from you. And right before we do that, I'm going to give you some super rapid fire advice. All right. And then we can talk about them in the questions if we need to. So one of them is where to go from here. Learn to let people see you. Don't be afraid of being vulnerable. Some people say that you shouldn't be vulnerable in the workplace. I tried that when I was very early in my career. I was trying to be like everybody around me. And what I ultimately found was that was inauthentic and I wasn't my best self. So I showed up as the weird yogi me, and I've been better for it. Learn how and when to see other people. People aren't always going to be ready for you or what you're bringing. So if you can learn to meet them where they're at, it'll be incredibly powerful. Understand your why and the power of why not. So understand your why. Go read Simon Sinek's Start with Why or listen to the TED Talk. It's fantastic. But understand the power of why not. So there's no downside, there's no risk. And you can and you always should be reinventing yourself. Be open to change. So where do you go from here? Learn to harness your knowledge and curiosity. Determine what you want and very consciously move towards it, no matter what anybody else tells you or what they say. And continuously seek to learn and grow always. So with that, I will leave you with my final comments on screen, and I would love to hear your questions.